I used to believe our vows were stronger than hunger and fear. Lena laughed that morning and said, "We'll be fine, won't we?" I said, "We always are. We choose each other." She kissed my cheek and whispered, "You're too good to worry." I worked 2 jobs that year. "Don't stay up for me," I told her. She replied, "I'm proud of you." Those words kept me moving when my body begged me to stop. One night, I came home early. Her heels were by the door. I heard her voice from the bedroom. "Not now," she said softly. "He's here." I froze. She laughed again, quieter. "Soon. I promise." My chest burned. I stepped back, silent, invisible. I told myself I misheard. I always protected her excuses. At dinner, she smiled and said, "Long day?" I answered, "Exhausting. You?" She said, "Meetings. Same old." I nodded like a fool. Later I asked, "Are you happy, Lena?" She paused. "Why ask that?" "I just want to know." She touched my hand. "Of course I am." I wanted to believe her warmth meant truth. I said, "I gave up my promotion for you." She stiffened. "I never asked you to." "I wanted us to grow together," I said. She pulled away. "Sometimes love isn't enough." Her phone buzzed. She flipped it face down. "Who was that?" I asked. She smiled too quickly. "Work." Silence swallowed the room. I realized then I was already alone. She stood and said, "I'm tired." I replied, "Good night." I lay awake counting breaths. Our vows echoed like broken glass. I understood the truth without words. She had already left. I stayed quiet because love made me weak. I remembered our wedding night. "You'll never leave me," she said. I replied, "Not in this lifetime." She smiled like she believed it. That memory hurt more than truth. I whispered, "When did I fail?" No answer came. Only her breathing, distant. I stood and walked to the sink. My reflection looked older. I said to myself, "Stay calm." I said it again. She called from the room, "Did you lock the door?" "Yes," I answered. "Good," she said. "You worry too much." I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked, "Do you still love me?" Her silence stretched. Then she said, "Don't start this." "I deserve honesty," I said. She replied, "You deserve sleep." I went back to bed beside her. She faced away. I faced the ceiling. I promised myself nothing. I planned nothing. I simply endured the night. Morning would come. So would goodbye. I just didn't know it yet. I closed my eyes and listened. Her phone vibrated once more. She didn't move. I knew then the truth was finished. Love had an expiration date. Mine had arrived early. I decided to stay silent. Silence felt safer than pleading. Silence felt like dignity. I thought, tomorrow I will smile. I thought, tomorrow I will survive. Beside me, she slept peacefully. Beside her, I broke quietly. That was the night our vows died. I carried the body alone. I stared at the ceiling until dawn. Light crept through the curtains. She stretched and said, "Morning." I answered, "Morning." Nothing else mattered anymore. I had seen enough. I had heard enough. I understood love could be replaced. I understood loyalty could be traded. I rose quietly and dressed. She watched me and asked, "You okay?" I said, "I'm fine." That lie was my last gift. Silence became my shield, and my story truly began. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I learned restraint. Love stayed behind me. Survival stepped forward. He chose silence over collapse. He chose endurance over shame. That choice saved me. It was quiet. Pain listened. I endured. This was only the beginning. My heart hardened, but I lived. And that mattered. More than love ever did. In the end, I survived alone. At last, I found the truth 2 days later, and it didn't come from Lena. It came from a screen. Victor's face filled the news clip. He smiled and said, "Success rewards those who choose wisely." I remembered him instantly. He was the man who once laughed at me during a failed pitch. He said, "Come back when you're worth my time." My phone buzzed. Lena's name lit up. I answered, "Yes?" She said, "We need to talk tonight." I replied, "About what?" She paused. "About us." That pause told me everything. When she came home, she didn't take off her coat. I asked, "Are you leaving?" She said, "I wasn't going to lie anymore." I nodded. "So it's Victor." She looked relieved. "You already know." I asked, "How long?" She said, "Long enough to understand what I want." I laughed once. "You want power." She replied, "I want security." I asked, "Was I ever enough?" She shook her head slowly. "You were kind, not strong." That hurt more than anger. I said, "I loved you." She answered, "Love doesn't pay bills." I stepped back. "Did he promise you everything?" She said, "He promised reality." I wanted to shout. Instead, I whispered, "You chose him because he humiliated me." She replied, "He challenged you. You stayed small." I clenched my fists. I asked, "Did you ever respect me?" She said, "I respected your effort." I said, "That's not an answer." She replied, "It's the only honest one." Silence crushed my chest. I asked, "Are you happy?" She said, "I will be." I watched her pack calmly. I said, "You're not even shaking." She replied, "I made this choice months ago." I asked, "So every smile was practice?" She didn't deny it. My voice cracked. "Say it was a mistake." She said, "I won't insult you with lies." I felt something tear inside me. I said, "Go." She hesitated. "You'll be okay." I laughed bitterly. "You don't get to comfort me." She nodded. "That's fair." At the door, she said, "Victor respects winners." I replied, "I respect myself." She paused. "You always needed pride." I said, "You always needed approval." She left without looking back. I sat on the floor and breathed. I remembered Victor's words years ago. "Know your place." I whispered, "I know it now." Anger burned, but I didn't chase her. I didn't beg. I didn't ask her to stay. I stood and said aloud, "I release you." The room answered with silence. I checked my account. Empty. I checked our photos. Gone. She took everything she could carry. She left me my name. I said, "That's enough." I thought about revenge. I thought about pleading. Both felt useless. I looked at the door and said, "I won't follow." My voice sounded stronger. That night, I learned restraint. I learned pride could survive betrayal. I packed one bag. I turned off my phone. I said, I disappear now. The man she left behind died quietly. I walked away before dawn. I didn't fight for love. I chose distance instead. Silence became my strategy. Survival became my goal. I left her world without noise. I took nothing but memory. That night, humiliation tried to own me. I refused. I walked into darkness calmly. I never looked back. I slept on a bus bench the first night. I said to myself, this is temporary. The bench answered with cold metal. I called my old friend Mark. He said, I'm busy right now. I said, I understand. He never called back. I went to my sister's place. She opened the door and whispered, Are you okay? I said, I'll manage. She hugged me like I was already broken. I lost my job a week later. My boss said, clients want confidence. I asked, did I fail? He replied, you stopped believing. I walked out carrying a box. I said, thank you for the chance. He nodded without meeting my eyes. Days blurred together. I counted coins before meals. I argued with myself out loud. I said, you should have seen it coming. I said, you deserved better. Both voices hated each other. One afternoon, I collapsed outside a warehouse. A voice said, you planning to die there? I looked up and said, not today. He studied me and asked, can you lift? I said, I can try. He said, trying doesn't pay. His name was Mr. Hale. He said, work earns food. Pity earns nothing. I nodded because hunger agrees fast. He handed me gloves and said, don't talk, move. I moved until my arm shook. I wanted to quit. I said, why help me? He replied, I'm not. That hurt, but it felt honest. At night I said, I hate her. He said, good. Hate won't save you. I snapped, then what will? He answered, discipline. Days turned into routine. I worked. I ate. I slept. I complained once. He said, no one owes you comfort. I asked, were you ever like this? He said, worse. That shut me up. One evening I said, I want revenge. He stopped and stared. He said, weak men want revenge. Strong men build. I asked, build what? He replied, the man you failed to be. I didn't answer. I lifted again. My body changed before my mind. My hands hardened. My voice steadied. I told myself, stay quiet. I told myself, learn. I passed my old street once. I didn't stop. Mr. Hale asked, you running? I said, no, I'm choosing. He nodded once. Weeks later, he paid me more. I said, why? He replied, you earned silence. I understood then. No announcements. No complaints. One night I said, I'm empty. He said, good. Nothing left to lose. I asked, will this end? He said, only if you quit. I didn't quit. I stopped blaming the past. I stopped chasing apologies. I said, I will rebuild. No one heard me. That felt right. I wasn't healed. I wasn't proud. I was alive. And for the first time, that was enough. I stopped counting years because counting reminded me of loss. I told myself, just work. Work answered back with failure. I failed again and said, good, learn. No one clapped. No one cared. One night, Mr. Hale said, "You're wasting strength here." I asked, "Then why keep me?" He replied, "Because you listen." He sent me to a small meeting. That's where I met Aaron. Aaron looked at my notes and said, "You think too small." I replied, "I think carefully." He smiled. "That's why you survive." We talked numbers. He said, "You're scared of risk." I said, "I respect loss." He answered, "Same thing, different excuse." I didn't like him. That meant he was useful. He asked, "Why are you really here?" I said, "To build something real." He leaned back. "Then stop acting temporary." We worked late. He challenged every idea I had. I argued back. He said, "You're angry." I said, "I'm focused." He replied, "You're hiding anger inside focus." That hit harder than insults. Weeks turned into plans. Plans turned into small wins. Aaron said, "Celebrate." I said, "Not yet." He laughed. "You don't trust success." I said, "Success leaves." He said, "Only if you beg it to stay." I heard Lena's name once at a party. Someone said, "She married well." I nodded and sipped my drink. Aaron noticed. He asked, "Old wound?" I replied, "Closed." That was a lie, but a quiet one. Another name followed. Victor. Someone said, "Untouchable." I felt nothing. That scared me more than anger. Aaron said, "You okay?" I said, "Better than okay." We took a risk others avoided. I said, "This could ruin us." He replied, "So could standing still." We signed anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I told myself, "You're afraid again." I told myself, fear means growth. Failure came fast. Aaron said, "We adjust." I said, "We survive." He smiled. "You're learning language." Months later, we stood in an empty office. He said, "Picture it full." I said, "Picture it lasting." He looked at me seriously. "You don't dream," he said. "I plan," he replied. News reached me through strangers. Photos. Headlines. Lena smiled in magazines. Victor stood beside her. Aaron watched my face. He asked, "Want to talk?" I said, "No." And I meant it. I realized then something had shifted. The past spoke softer. Aaron said, "You're dangerous now." I asked, "How?" He replied, "You don't need approval." We argued less. We trusted more. One night I said, "I was betrayed." He said, "So are most men who win." I asked, "Do you believe that?" He said, "I bet on it." I stared at the city lights. I said, "I won't chase them." He asked, "Who?" I answered, "Anyone who left." Silence followed. Then Aaron said, "That's ambition." I finally understood. Revenge looks loud. Power grows quietly. I said, "From now on, I build." No anger. No announcements. Aaron nodded. "That's the choice," he said. I felt calm for the first time. Not healed. Not forgiven. Focused. I stopped measuring my life against betrayal. I measured it against progress. That night, I didn't think of Lena. I didn't think of Victor. I thought of tomorrow. And tomorrow finally belonged to me. I stepped off the car and felt the city shift beneath me. A valet said, "Mr. Collins." I nodded. "Thank you." The lobby buzzed, cameras flashing. Someone whispered, "He's the new king of this block." I smiled slightly. "I just work." A woman approached. "You're early, Mr. Collins?" I said, "Preparation never waits." She was calm, observant. She said, "I'm Sophia. You'll find I notice more than most." I replied, "Noted." People crowded around, shaking hands. I said, "Good to see you all." They responded warmly. And then I saw her. Lena. She paused, mid-laugh with someone else. Her eyes widened for half a second. I said to myself, "Not mine anymore." She didn't approach. I didn't either. Victor stood nearby, confident. He spotted me and said, "Collins, didn't expect you here." I smiled faintly. "I'm full of surprises." He laughed. "We'll see if you survive this floor." I said nothing. Silence spoke louder than any words. Victor didn't notice. Lena watched. I felt a strange calm. A colleague said, "Mr. Collins, ready for the presentation?" I nodded. "Let's begin." I spoke clearly, numbers sharp, ideas undeniable. Aaron's strategies played through me seamlessly. Afterward, applause. Sophia whispered, "You handled them like a master." I said, "The trick is listening more than speaking." Lena lingered near the exit. I passed by. She murmured, "You've changed." I replied, "Time does that." She looked at Victor, who frowned, unaware of my presence. I said quietly, "Keep your eyes open." Sophia raised an eyebrow. I shrugged. "Just advice." Lena said, "I never thought." I cut softly. "There's nothing left to think." Victor approached later, full of swagger. He said, "Business grows fast, too fast for rookies." I said, "Experience counts for more than luck." He laughed, awkward now. I said nothing else. The tables were silent witnesses. Sophia guided me through the crowd. She asked, "Do you feel different?" I said, "Calm, finally." Lena's glance followed me. I didn't look back. She didn't call my name. Victor's mistakes became obvious in the small details. I noted them quietly. Each error built my advantage. Later, in the office hallway, I said to Sophia, "Power is quieter than they imagine." She smiled, and much sweeter when unnoticed. I added, "I no longer chase anything lost." She nodded, understanding without asking. Victor bragged about connections. I listened. I took notes. Patience, I reminded myself, always wins. Lena lingered again. She whispered, "I hope you're well." I said, "I am." No apology. No lunging. I passed by her with purpose. She didn't follow. I didn't expect her to. Later, Aaron called. He said, "You made an impression." I replied, "Yes," quietly. I realized then that power wasn't flashy. It was control. Measured. Silent. Sophia said, "You're different from everyone else here." I said, "I stopped trying to impress." Victor underestimated me. Lena saw what she couldn't reach. I felt a calm smile form. For the first time, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. I only needed the quiet truth of control. And that truth belonged to me. I heard it first from a business insider. "Victor's losing clients," they said. I nodded. "Interesting." Aaron looked up. Do you want to intervene? I said no. Let it unfold. Victor didn't notice me. That was the point. A week later, his first partner left. He called them desperate. I smiled quietly. Lena's name came in an email. Victor is acting strangely, she wrote. I replied politely, I'm sure he'll handle it. She responded immediately. Do you think he will? I said, I can't say. I remembered the man I once loved. The man she once loved. I said to myself, that's gone. Victor lost another deal. He yelled at staff. I watched from a distance and said, control your anger. A colleague whispered, why are you helping him? I said, I'm not. Lena called that night. Her voice trembled. Why is he like this? I replied calmly, I don't know. I hope he finds balance. She said, it's like he's punishing everyone. I said, maybe he's learning a lesson. She hesitated. Do you care? I said softly, I care about fairness, not feelings. Her sigh carried regret. I remembered the nights I stayed awake for her. I said nothing. Victor fired another associate. I said quietly, arrogance always backfires. Aaron smiled. Patience is rewarding. Lena called again. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I replied, you're strong enough to figure it out. She begged for advice. I said, think carefully. Don't rush. I caught myself thinking of old memories. I stopped. I reminded myself, she chose him. Victor's empire continued cracking. He lost a key investor. I said, timing is everything. Lena emailed again. I never thought he'd betray me like this. I said, he's never been reliable. Her insecurity was evident. I said nothing more. Let her learn what I had learned the hard way. Aaron said, you've changed. You no longer react. I replied, I don't need to. Karma has its way. Victor humiliated himself in a board meeting. He shouted, this is unacceptable. I whispered, then stop being reckless. Lena called once more. Could you help me? I said, I can't. You must stand alone. Her voice cracked. I felt a twinge, but I refused to step back into the past. I said to myself, no, silence is strength. Aaron said, you watch without interference. That's wisdom. I nodded. And restraint. Victor's last ally withdrew support. I observed quietly. No gliding. No triumph. Lena's security faltered. She admitted in a message, I feel lost. I replied, find your footing. I realized I had shed the last emotional chain. No. Longing. No anger. Victor's arrogance destroyed him. Lena's dependence broke. And I only felt calm. Sophia appeared beside me. You're different, she said. I said, I finally let go of what I can't control. Aaron looked at me and said, karma moves slowly but sure. I smiled faintly, and I don't need to hurry it. That night, I reflected. I said to myself, the past is silent. The present is mine. Dadder. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need her. I only needed this moment. Victor's empire faltered. Lena's world shook. And I stood quietly, unshaken. For the first time, I felt truly free. The knock came softly. I said, come in. Lena stepped into the office, eyes wide. I need to talk, she said. I gestured to the chair. Sit. She hesitated. I was wrong. I said quietly, I suspected as much. Tears formed. I thought ambition was love, she said. I nodded. Then power felt like safety? Yes, she whispered. I chased illusions, not you. I replied, better late than never. She looked surprised. I added, but timing matters. She said, I can't undo what I did. I said, no, you can't. That's why I don't chase you. Her voice cracked. Do you hate me? I shook my head. Hate solves nothing. I only learned. I ruined us, she said. You ruined your choices, I corrected softly. She looked down. I never appreciated your patience. I said, I appreciated my own strength more. She asked, could we ever go back? I said calmly, we can't. Lena blinked. You're calm. I said, I've moved past what I cannot change. Her lips trembled. I thought I needed him. I said, you needed what you thought was safe. I was blind, she admitted. I replied, we are all blind at some point. She wiped her tears. Victor, he's losing everything. I said, I've seen it. She whispered, do you feel satisfaction? I shook my head. No, only closure. Her voice faltered. Closure for you? I said, for both of us. I choose dignity over revenge. She said nothing for a long moment. Then softly, I don't deserve this calm. I said, it's not about you deserving. It's about me surviving. I kept hurting you, she said. I replied, you chose a path. I chose to walk away quietly. She sniffled. Do you forgive me? I said, forgiveness isn't needed. I released you the night you left. Her hands shook. I can't believe how composed you are. I smiled faintly. Composure is survival. Anger is wasted energy. She lowered her gaze. And Victor? I said, he's facing the consequences of his choices. She whispered, I never realized. I interrupted softly. You realized too late. That's all anyone can learn. She asked, do you hate him? I replied, no, I only watched. That's enough. I wanted you, she said. I said, I am not yours to want anymore. That life ended when you chose another. She paused. I made the wrong choice. I said, acknowledgement is better than excuses, but it changes nothing. Tears fell freely now. I said quietly, I wish you could understand this isn't about revenge. It's about strength. She whispered, you're stronger than I imagined. I replied, I built myself quietly, without you. That's how strength works. I'm sorry, she said again. I nodded. I know, and I accept that it's too late. She stood slowly. I won't bother you again. I said, that is wise. The door closed behind her. Silence filled the room. I sat back and breathed deeply. No anger lingered. No longing remained. Victor's empire crumbled in headlines the next day. I read quietly. I felt nothing but calm. I said to myself, this is closure, not triumph, not revenge, only dignity. I smiled faintly. For the first time, I felt complete. I whispered, some lessons are learned too late, but still learned. And I closed the chapter on the past. The office was quiet. I said, morning, everyone. They responded with nods, smiles, not fear. Sophia appeared beside me. You've changed, she said. I smiled faintly. I had to. She asked, "Do you ever regret the past?" I said, "Not anymore. I learned from it." One of the team said, "Your decision on the project was bold." I replied, "Bold, yes, but calculated." He nodded. "We respect that." I said, "Respect comes from trust, not authority." Sophia looked at me carefully. "You've earned both," she said. I answered, "It was never about earning them. It's about being consistent." I sat at my desk and spoke to the team. Every challenge here is a choice. Face it honestly, and the result follows. One junior asked, "Do you still think about what happened before?" I said quietly, "I think about lessons, not people." She smiled faintly, understanding. Sophia asked, "Do you trust me?" I said, "Yes, as an equal." She raised an eyebrow. "Not just a partner?" I said, "No, someone whose insight I value." I looked at my reflection in the window. I said to myself, "You're not the same man who lost everything." The scars remain, but they don't control me. A colleague asked, "How do you stay so steady?" I said, "Experience teaches patience, and patience teaches strength." Sophia leaned closer. "You've become someone people follow without fear." I replied, "Steady leadership outweighs intimidation every time." I thought of Lena. I said quietly, "I've let go of her, completely." Sophia nodded. "Good. That's progress." I smiled. More than progress. Freedom. Another team member asked, "Are you ever lonely?" I answered, "Loneliness is a choice. Connection is another. I choose wisely now." Sophia said, "And it shows." I said, "Actions matter more than words." That's what I wanted them to see. I walked through the office, greeting quietly. No one flinched. No one doubted me. One intern asked, "Do you regret what you lost?" I said, "I regret nothing that taught me to grow." Sophia looked at me. "You're different, stronger." I smiled. Not stronger than before. Smarter, controlled, patient. I remembered the man I was. Hungry, angry, broken. I said to myself, "You survived him. You became someone worthy of respect." I noticed Sophia observing a report. I asked, "What do you think?" She said, "We should expand cautiously." I nodded. Agreed. Caution paired with ambition. I paused, reflecting. The scars are visible in memory, but they no longer define me. I whispered, "I am complete in my own way." She smiled softly. "You've truly become the man you needed to be." I said, "It took years, but it was worth it." One junior asked, "What advice would you give someone starting now?" I said, "Value patience, build quietly, and never let the past steal your present." Sophia added, "And remember your own strength." I nodded. Exactly. That's the man I became. I looked out at the city skyline. The lights reminded me of challenges faced, obstacles overcome, and lessons learned. I whispered, "I'm steady now. I lead with clarity." I felt calm. The man I used to be watches silently, but he no longer controls me. I am whole, and I finally trust myself completely. I woke before dawn and stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched endlessly, lights shimmering like distant stars. I said to myself, "This is mine now." A soft knock came. Sophia appeared. "Early again?" I smiled faintly. "Routine." She said, "The board approves your expansion plan." I replied, "They trusted the numbers, not me. That's enough." She looked at me curiously. You never brag. I said, bragging is for the insecure. I'm not. I remembered Lena briefly, as if she were a shadow in another life. I whispered, she chose a different path. Sophia asked, does it still bother you? I shook my head, only to confirm she's truly gone from my world. Weeks passed, and I noticed her sometimes, at galas, in magazines, in whispers. People pointed her out. I said nothing aloud. Inside, I acknowledged only the lesson, not longing. Aaron called one evening. Victor's completely collapsed, he said. I replied quietly, I've seen it. Karma doesn't need my hand. Sophia smiled. You've really detached. I said, detachment is freedom. I no longer need approval or revenge. One morning, I walked through a park alone. Children played nearby, laughter echoing. I whispered, this life is mine. Quiet, steady, complete. A passerby dropped their bag. I picked it up. Thank you, they said. I nodded. I realized respect is earned in small moments, not headlines. Later, a reporter asked, Mr. Collins, do you ever think about your past? I said calmly, the past shapes me, but it does not rule me. I thought of Lena again. She had power, comfort, influence, but never the man I became. I said quietly, she lives the life she chose, not one I built. Sophia asked, do you miss anything? Y replied, no, not people, not mistakes, only the lessons. I heard her voice in my memory, soft, pleading once. Do you still love me? I answered silently. I love my own life more. Aaron sent a message. Dinner tonight. Celebrate progress. I typed back, I'll be there. And I meant it. That night, I looked at the skyline from our new office. Sophia beside me said, you seem at peace. I said, peace comes from choice. I chose my own path. The world outside continued, busy, loud, indifferent. I stayed steady, unshaken. Somewhere, Lena might have caught sight of me, calm and respected. She might have wondered, as people always do, what it would be like to walk in my stead. I said quietly, that path closed the moment she chose another. No gloating. No triumph declared. Only quiet certainty. I whispered, I don't need revenge. I smiled softly. I don't need her recognition. I watched the city lights reflect in Sophia's eyes. She asked, are you finally satisfied? I said, I am. Enough to know I stand on my own. I thought of the man I was, the one who loved blindly, who broke quietly. I said to myself, he taught me everything. I outgrew him. The night wind brushed my face. I felt steady. I felt worthy. I felt alive. No past can reach me. No regrets can bind me. I said softly, I am enough. And for the first time, I believed it completely. The city continued to glow, indifferent and beautiful. And I walked forward, a king of my own life, sitting firmly on a throne I had chosen myself.